Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So let's continue with our discussion. So we were discussing statistical learning theory and empirical risk minimization in particular. So let's continue that discussion. So let me also share my screen. I hope all of you can see my screen. So, so we were looking at empirical risk minimization. So empirical risk minimization. So let me just write down the setting as I usually do in this class. So you have the empirical risk minimization setting. We have all the associated parameters here: feature space, Y, H. This is the collection of all the hypotheses which goes from X to your action space A. Then you have the loss function, which measures how good a particular action is, right? And then what you will look is you look at what is called as the risk of a classifier R of H, which is expected value of L of Y comma H of X. Okay, so that brings us to the question of the underlying distribution, which is Px comma Y, which is Px into Py given X, right? And then also leads us to the discussion on the samples. You have been given the samples, which is your training data. Okay. Then, of course, empirical risk, which is what we can actually measure from the data, which is 1 over n summation. Okay, and this is what we can measure from the data. This is the data error, and what we would like to do is we would like to have what is called as consistency. Okay, so consistency says that your true risk of your whatever is returned by your classifier, which is, so if I have to write that as well, so this is what is this? So Hn hat star is basically R min of R hat n of H, right? H belonging to H. This is what your learning algorithm can give, and whereas what we want is the best in our bag. Okay. So I repeat this because without this, most of the discussion doesn't make any sense, right? So what we want is that the true risk should go to this one, like the true risk of your learning algorithm, whatever that returns, should go to the true risk of your best hypothesis in bag, right? So that in some symbolically, I would like this. More formally, this says that for all epsilon delta greater than 0, what I want is that probability R of Hn hat star minus R of H star, okay, greater than epsilon is less than or equal to delta. So sometimes in the previous class, I might have missed this. So it doesn't matter really whether you put or not, but let's just consistently try to put less than or equal to, okay. So this one should be like this probability should be less than delta for all n greater than n, okay. And then we saw that consistency also gives us another desired result, which is through consistency and uniform convergence we can get. So anyway, before that, consistency is achieved if and only if we have uniform convergence. So uniform convergence says for all epsilon delta greater than 0, okay, there exists an n. Okay, what does the n say? Probability between Rn hat of H minus R of H, okay, this greater than epsilon is less than or equal to delta. So this is true for any hypothesis in your bag. Okay, so this is independent of that. You're taking the worst hypothesis and just trying to see if it crosses R of H more than epsilon, the probability can be bound less than delta, provided you have been given enough samples. Okay, without this supremum, this would have been weak law of large numbers. Okay, so but with the supremum, it becomes uniform convergence. So as I was telling, when you have these two properties, you also get another important property, which is you also get Rn hat of Hn star this goes to R of H star. So this is your data error that goes to your best in the bag risk. Okay. So this is what we saw. And what is very important here is this box here. So we will again take this, copy this, because we will require it several places. So then we saw, so the question now remains is, the central underlying question in the statistical learning theory concerns, how do we choose a hypothesis class H such that we get uniform convergence? Okay, so this is the central uniform convergence, so that, you know, when you get uniform convergence, you also have consistency of empirical risk minimization. Okay, so you get that once you have uniform convergence, you get that. Uniform convergence is this property. So how do we get that? So with that, we saw several examples. First case that we saw was finite. Okay, so suppose my hypothesis bag HF, F indicates that it's finite. It has M elements, capital M elements, H1, H2, all the way till HM. What we said is cardinality of HF is equal to capital M. Okay, when that happens, what we showed is that probability soup H belonging to HF, because we are in the finite world now, Rn hat of H minus R of H greater than epsilon. Okay, this is less than or equal to 2m exponential e power minus 2m epsilon square. Okay, so this is like the modified Hofding. And then we also did one more thing in last class. We also looked for infinite case. Okay, infinite case. So what we said is probability that soup over, so infinite case, it means H, cardinality of H is infinity. Okay, so soup over H belonging to H, Rn hat of H minus R of H greater than epsilon. Okay, this is actually equal to, less than or equal to. So in the last class, I might have written 8, but a more tighter number is 4. Expected value of M of, so M of H 2n S2n. Okay, and e power minus n epsilon squared by 8. Okay, so here in the finite case, when you have some number like this, right? So this number, once you have this number, I can produce for any epsilon and delta, there exists. So we can produce capital N such that uniform convergence is satisfied, right? That we can do. But when you come to this, right, when you write an expression like this in the infinite case, we really don't know whether, see, this expectation is fine, but it is not a constant number. So as in particular, as n increases, right, this may also be some function of n. Okay, if it is a function of some n, okay, so if it is a function of n, that is still okay, because some function of n into e power, this is still okay. But if it is an exponential, like if it's a number like 2 power n, right, then the effect of this is minimized. This will not be usable. So the question is that there are two problems here. One is, so issues, number one, this expected value of M of H of 2n S2n. Okay, if it is similar to, if it is like some e power some n, if it is similar to that, then this bound, right, this bound is useless. I hope everyone can understand why. Because if you put e power n and then e power minus n, they cancel each other, and then you are left with some kind of a constant, and that is not really useful. Okay, so what you would like to do is, as n increases, this probability should get smaller and smaller. Okay, if it is e power n, something like e power n, then this is useless. But if it is some polynomial of n, then it is still useful. Okay, that is problem number one, that if it is e power n, then we will not be able to use. Secondly, the expectation, okay, expectation term requires the knowledge of the joint distribution Pxy, right? How do you take an expectation if you don't know what is the underlying distribution, right? So if we knew this, then we already know what to do. We had our Bayes classifier was there. We could have done something much better. We didn't even have to come to this entire world. We didn't need samples. Nothing was necessary. If expectation, if the underlying joint distribution was known. So these two things are the problem. So what we do is we do a simple trick. So what we say, so this is so how do we solve it? We will systematically look at what do we do for one and what do we do for two. Okay, but before that, I would like to, so whatever is written so far, everybody should, even though you may not necessarily remember the proof, which is probably not what I will even ask for you in the exam, but I want all of you to at least have some kind of an intuitive understanding on whatever we have discussed in this page. Okay, so can I just quickly check if everyone follows this much? So please ask me if there are any questions. Otherwise, just in the chat, if you say if everything is clear, just let me know. So 13 out of 29. What happened to both others? $15. So if there are questions, please ask folks. Yes, are there any questions? Okay, so moving on. So then there are these two issues. One is that if the term here, the expectation term here, if it is growing as a function of n, then the effect is nullified. Whatever benefit you had by having a negative exponent, that gets cancelled away. That is one term. The second is the expectation terms requires the knowledge of Pxy. And that is again something that it's too much to expect. We don't know that. So we need some way to address these two problems. And we will look at issue number 2, which is far more easier. And then we will look at issue number 1. Okay, so issue number 2. So what we don't know is expected value of m of h of 2n s2n. Okay, so what is h? Let us try to remind ourselves. H is a collection of all the functions that takes from x to an action space A, right? So given a set of features, h is your classifier, which is telling you what action to take. All right, so if it is y, then it is like a usual classifier, right? So it's not really something new. But what I would like you to observe is that within x, we also know x is going to be some subset of Rd. So there are d-dimensional features. So it is some subset of Rd. Okay. So H is encapsulating what is the dimensionality of the problem. That is one thing it captures. Okay. And then the number of S2n represents how the sample points are arranged. Okay. So what we do is, instead of trying to take an expectation, we will look at this number instead. We will try to find out max over all possible arrangements, right? Max over all possible arrangements. I will try to find out how many distinguishable functions are there. Okay. So what is this on the right hand side? This is telling you consider all possible configuration of your 2n points. Okay. You consider all possible configuration of your 2n points and then tell me what is the maximum number of distinguishable hypotheses are existing owing to your hypothesis class H, right? So we have already seen an example of in a two-dimensional space, right? If there were 4 points, we have seen that you cannot shatter it. Whereas if there were 3 points, you could shatter it, right? So basically M represents that number, which is like in given every possible configurations, how many hypotheses can you distinguish? Okay, so this represents like a power of your hypothesis. Okay, so how expressible is your hypothesis? So what we will do is that we will address issue 2 by, instead of looking at trying to compute the expectation, we will try to look at this. So let us call fancy M H of 2n equal to, let us call this as max of over all possible samples M H 2n S2n. Okay, this is that script. It's called script M, right? Little bit fancy M. So this is like your like I'm taking the worst possible number of hypotheses that can arise given there are 2n samples. Okay, how many distinguishable things you can get. Okay, so this is issue number 2. Now we have addressed it. So the question of issue number 1 is still remains, right? So if I replace this expectation with this, so now issue number 2 is addressed by replacing this. So let me copy this over somewhere and then we will see how to do it. Okay. So this whole term now we replace with fancy M H of 2n. So this is no longer a random thing. Okay, so let me just yeah. So this is what it was originally, right? So now issue number 2 is addressed by replacing it with a number like this. Okay. So that is addressed. So now we still need to address issue number 1. So that we will do in the following way. So we will take this MH of 2n and we will push it into the exponent. Okay, so let's work with the right hand side. So RHS is given by 4 M H of 2n e power minus n epsilon squared by 8. So I will write this as 4 e power minus n epsilon squared by 8 plus ln m of H2n. Okay. So this is the thing that we will do first. Is that okay? So now we will also do one another thing. So what we have done, we have now pushed this M H of 2n, this whole function capital M into the exponent, and we have written it as a log. So if this log M term, okay, is like the function, it's like a function of n, then we can't learn. If it is less than some, if it is like a log n term, this function is like log n term, then we are good, right? So does everybody understand that? So if ln of m of H2n, if that term is like a function of n, like it's some 2n or n by 8 or n by 7 or whatever, then you cannot learn. However, if it is a log term of n, then we can learn. Okay, so this second term is actually very important. Okay, it's important enough that we are going to like replace that with a number which we are going to call it as a growth function. Nothing too complicated. We are just giving a new name for it. Okay, so let us define. So we are going to call this term as a growth function. Okay, growth function h of m is equal to ln m h of m. M is the number of samples. Okay, so if m is equal to 2n, then we get the same thing. So This is what we will use as a shorthand notation. Okay. And now is the most important result from owing to VC. Okay, Vapnik and Shervan and Kinsey. So what is the Shervan and Kiss? Okay, so that is the result. So what they have shown is the following. So the growth function of every hypothesis H, okay, for all H, for no matter what H you choose, the growth function of M has two regions. Okay, it has two regions. One region is until a particular point, which is called as the VC dimension of the hypothesis class. Okay, until the VC dimension, you are able to get 2 power M, like M of ln2 you will get. That means you are able to shatter until the VC dimension, you are able to shatter. Okay, beyond the VC dimension, okay, what happens is the growth function now dramatically becomes, so this is a constant, right? dVC of H is a constant. The VC dimension now dramatically becomes this. Okay, so for M greater than d VC dimension of H. Okay, so let us try to repeat the whole thing once again for getting the thing clear. So what we had is for the infinite case, okay, we had this expression that we derived from the last class. Okay, here this is the expected value of how many distinguishable hypotheses exist, right? So this one, you will know a trivial bound is 2 power 2n, right? For 2n samples, there are up to distinguishable 2 power 2n is a trivial upper bound. Okay, so now there are two issues when you want to use this. One issue is if it is something like 2 power 2n, essentially it is like a e power n kind of an exponential term, then this bound is useless, right? So this is issue number one. Issue number two is this expectation we don't know how to compute. Okay, so what we did for addressing issue number two, what we said is this expectation, what we will do is we will, instead of taking the expected value as such, we will look at the over all possible samples, what is the maximum that you could have shattered. Okay, that is your MH of 2n. So if this number is 2 power 2n, that means all possible things you could get. For that particular 2n, you could get all possible hypotheses. That is what it means, right? So one issue number two is addressed if you replace this expectation with this M. And then to make it more precise, what we did is this M, we moved it into the exponential term so that we can do term by term comparison. Okay, and here if you observe, this is called as a growth function. If this growth function is a function of n, then there is no use. We can't use this bound for anything. It's pretty useless if this is a function of n. Right? If it is not a function of n, if it is a log term, then we can learn. Okay. So what VC dimension did, sorry, what VC did, like Vapnik and Shervan and Kiss, what they did is they have shown that for every hypothesis, there exist two regions of the growth function. In one region, you are able to shatter. Okay. For that. So now, just to make life simple, instead of I'm calling 2n is equal to m. Okay. So I've written it as m. So basically what VC did is they have shown that until there is two regions where these growth functions have particular value, in one region which is less than the VC dimension, the growth function is linear. Can you see that? It's linear in M. Whereas in the second region it's logarithmic in M. Okay. So if you are given number of data points beyond M, beyond VC dimension, if you are given number of points beyond VC dimension, then what you will have is like a term here, which is anyway minus n epsilon square by 8 plus some logarithm of n, right? The number of data points. And in that region, if you have sufficiently large number of samples, you will be able to find an n, which will do that. You will be able to get an n such that you can get uniform convergence. Okay. So that is the whole idea of the VC theory. So are there any questions here?
Sir.
So shall I just, yeah, Bhavna.
Sir, while addressing the issue first, you said we can't have something e raised to power n. So we have done, so we can't have like 2 power n something, but
Exactly.
we can say that the fancy m can be equal to 2 power n. So
It
how this is?
can, no, it is equal to 2 power n only when your number of data points is less than the VC dimension. As soon as you cross the VC dimension, as soon as your number of data points is beyond the VC dimension, what you are having, the growth function, this is a constant, right, Bhavna?
Yes, sir.
So this is a constant. So only thing that is varying is m, right? So this is now logarithmic. Can you see that? It's log. Ln is natural log of n.
Yes,
Correct?
sir.
So now when you put natural log of n here, then you can learn. Is that okay?
Sir, but how this fancy m address the issue, the second issue?
So now the fancy m, if I'm able to put this here instead of, so where does the fancy m plug in? This is where it plugs in, right? So ln of fancy m is what we are calling as gh, right, Bhavna?
Yes, sir.
So now I am going to plug in. Suppose if I have given you that the number of data samples I am having is beyond the VC dimension, I will take this as my logarithmic of the fancy m. This is what is going to come in here, correct?
Yes, sir.
So now what do you have? 4 e power minus n epsilon square by 8 plus some constant times ln of 2n, right?
Okay, yes, sir.
So now once you have ln minus n epsilon square will beat positive ln n after some time. It will beat it for sure, right? You have seen that. Exponent will beat, the polynomial will beat logarithm, right?
Yes, sir.
So once you are able to, if this is like n is too large, we can even start ignoring this second term. And then we are back into the world where it is 4 e power minus n epsilon square by 8. And then you are fine, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Fine.
Is it clear now?
Yes, sir. It's clear. Yes.
Okay. So how about others? So Devyani, do you follow this discussion?
Yes, sir.
Siddharth, both the Siddharths, how do you find this? Is it okay? This is the important part.
Yes, sir, it's clear to me.
Yes, sir, it's clear to me as well.
Okay, very good. All right, so I'm not asking everybody, but I hope you will not be shy at this point and don't ask. Okay, so anyway, so that's good. So now essentially what VC has shown is that for every H, okay, there exists a VC dimension like this. The unfortunate thing is the VC dimension is less than or equal to infinity. So sometimes what can happen is the VC dimension is infinity. Okay, so we know one thing. So what are the conclusions we can say? Conclusions. So one is, if dVC of H for a particular hypothesis is less than infinity, then what we can say, uniform convergence holds. Correct? From whatever I discussed with Bhavna, we can say that uniform convergence holds. Okay, that also means empirical risk minimization happens. Okay. If dVC of H is infinity, if the VC dimension of some hypothesis is infinity, so what that means, your hypothesis bag has in fact too many hypotheses. There is no way you can learn anything. So this, whenever you are having dVCH of infinity, what it means is learning is infeasible. Learning is not possible. Okay. So no matter how many training data I give you, you cannot learn. So essentially, if at all you want to propose a new hypothesis bag, all you need to do is you need to show that the VC dimension of that bag is less than infinity. And then we are in business. So then we can now start collecting data, and then we can learn, and then you will get the best in your bag, you will get. Okay, eventually. So that is what we have shown. And question remains is, what do we do with this? How do we find the VC dimension for a bag? Okay, so that we have seen one example in the last class. So in that line, we will show several other examples. Okay, and we will see how to compute VC dimensions for different hypotheses back. Okay, so far what we have done is we have finished. Now this actually kind of is like ending the discussion on empirical risk minimization. So what I will do in the examination, right, for all of you. So what we will do is we will not ask questions which are like too difficult. I mean, I will ask questions in the examination, final examination. The questions will be primarily on the definition aspects for PAC learning. Primarily, it will be on the definition aspects of empirical risk minimization. And I may ask you to compute the VC dimension for several different types of hypotheses. Okay, so that is the nature of question you can expect. And I will not ask anything which requires you too much knowledge about Hoftings and manipulating these kind of things, which is a very difficult thing to do. And given that this is a fundamental course, first course in machine learning, we cannot go into that level. So that's what we will do. Okay, so just to give you like some kind of a thing, and also because of the current situation, because there are so many tensions that you have outside of this one. So what I plan to do is 50% of the questions, 50% of all that I will ask in the final exam will be directly based on the video lectures that we have done in the class. So those things should help you. Okay, so don't worry if you don't understand all the intricate details of the proof. The discussion of the proofs was just to give you some steps to remember so that you can understand how these ideas were developed. Okay, it's not to test. We will not be testing all the finer aspects of the proofs. Okay, all right. So now we have to do two things. Yeah.
So I just wanted to confirm that say we have a problem and we first propose a hypothesis back for which the dVC is less than infinity.
Yes.
And then we have to have at least 2n points such that this 2n is more than the VC dimension.
That's right. That's right.
So if these two criteria are met, then in our learning algorithm will find the best classifier there is.
Yes. So in fact there is a rule of thumb. So let me state that. So there is a rule of thumb. Okay. So what that says is, if you're like for learning, okay, you need 10 times the number of the VC dimension of your bag. So this is the rule of thumb. Okay, so whatever is the VC dimension, you need 10 times that. So whatever you were asking, Rohit, so this is the rule of thumb that is practically used by people.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now
we'll be seeing how to calculate the VC dimension, right?
Yes. So that is the next discussion, how to calculate VC dimension for different hypotheses back. So that's what we are going to do.
Yes.
Okay. So before that, I want to show another application of how this VC inequality will be useful. I want to show another application. So that is what we will do now. And again, if time permits, today we will see some examples on how to find the VC dimension for different hypotheses back. Okay. See, this is an interesting idea, and it's, I think, kind of fascinating that you can show something like this, right? For so general class of problems. So I think the idea itself is pretty interesting. So I hope all of you are quite convinced that this is useful. Okay. So now we will try to show one consequence of this VC inequality. Okay, so now so whenever you do any scientific experiment, right? So there is what is called as a p-value. Okay, so this what is the p-value saying? So this is like a number that is chosen to indicate that. So for instance, right? So whenever I do some new drug, okay, and the efficacy I will measure on two groups, right? This we have discussed before, but let me repeat. So there is one group which is the treatment group, right? So you administer the drug to the treatment group, and into the control group, you give a very similar looking medicine, which is called as a placebo. And then you measure some kind of a performance, like you measure some body stuff, right? Like something like temperature or blood pressure or like health result, whether that person survives or dies and things like that, right? And once you look at your this experiment, you get one number. Okay, out of this you get a number which is called as the efficacy of the drug, right? So what you would get is you will get an interval. So the average will be something like, let us say, some number 25, but you will get a interval which is like 90% interval. So what that means is you will choose 95% interval, so that this probability here is 0.025, and this probability here is also 0.025. So the actual true parameter lies in the 95% confidence interval, right? So 95% confidence interval like this, and you will get some number. So the efficacy can be, say, 23.5 to 26.5, right? So this kind of things is what you typically report, right? So that p-value is typically chosen as 0.05. Okay. So this is how one does scientific experiments, right? So in the same way, if I want to choose, like if I take the VC inequality, so let me start with the VC inequality right away. Shift. So what do we have on the left hand side? We have this, right? So probability soup over H belonging to H, Rn H minus R of H is greater than epsilon. Okay, so this is what is on the left hand side. This is like the equivalent thing that we derived for the infinite case. So this is what we have so far, right? So now what you can do is, like, you can choose a significance level delta. So let delta be a significance level, right? And we know that the second term, if you want to expand it, this you can write it as assuming that you have enough number of data samples, you can replace the second term with this, right? So let us do that. Choose n large enough so that we have 2n is bigger than dVc of H. Suppose if you do that, then what we get, we can replace this as 4 plus what is that thing, dVc, let me write that, ln 2n by dVc H, okay, plus 1, something like this. Okay, so this we will choose n large enough so that this is, two things are happening. One is this is true, and secondly we are getting less than delta. Okay, so if these things are given, what you can do is, so suppose this is true. So we want to find out what is the epsilon that you will get out of this. Okay, so solving for epsilon, if we solve for epsilon, it's going to be kind of a lot of steps here. So let me try to do it slowly. I'm going to 100% make mistakes. Let me start this in a new page. Solving for epsilon. What do we get? So this is where we start off with. So epsilon. So suppose since we have to solve for it, so let us assume this is equality. Okay. So delta by 4, then I take log. So I will get minus n epsilon square by 8 plus dBCH ln 2n dBCH plus 1, right? This is equal to ln of delta by 4. Okay. Now moving terms here and there. So we will get n epsilon squared by 8 is equal to dBCH ln of 2n by dBCH plus 1. So this is just a very simple rote algebra. Okay, don't get too bogged down. There is nothing that I'm doing here. Just trying to do some algebra, and most likely I will be making mistakes also. Okay, any case, that's not the point that it's like that. But let's just hope that this is all correct, and you will get something like this. Okay, 4 by delta. Okay. Now, this is our epsilon. Now, what are we saying? What is it that we have got from here? We have got some epsilon here. Yes, there is some mistake here.
So 8 by n is multiplied with both the terms. So inside the square root.
Okay, thank you. 8 by n is in the both terms. Yeah, thanks. So whatever it is, some number. What is that saying is, for anything in my bag, I will not be making an error more than this epsilon, right? So that actually directly gives me the result, which is R of h, Rn of R of h, which is the true risk for any thing in the bag. Okay, for all h, right? For every h in my bag, I am guaranteed that R of h is less than Rn hat of h plus this term. Let me copy it. It's ridiculous to keep writing it again and again. So what's the big deal? So the big deal is, this is what we measure using data, right? This is our data error. Okay, so for everything in my bag, I am saying that data error plus some extra term is an upper bound for my true risk. Isn't that fantastic? So this is what we had as data error. This is what we can calculate using our learning algorithm, whatever that empirical risk is there, right? 1 over n. So what is the data error? So let me write that. This is 1 over n summation L of yi h of xi. So this I can do very easily, right? Given my data samples, I can do this very easily. So what I'm saying is, the true empirical risk is upper bounded by the data error plus some term. Okay, so let's write that. So the upper term I would like you to notice, right? This log term is not so important. These are all constants. It is mainly dVc of h by n. Okay, as n increases, these terms become smaller and smaller. Okay, as n increases, this becomes smaller and smaller. So essentially what we have is that our RH is upper bounded by Rn hat of H plus a term omega H of N. Okay, so this is representing complexity of our bag. Okay, so now at this point we can make one important conclusion. See, whenever I try to do, what did we do when we tried to learn? When we try to learn, we try to find out an Hn hat star, which was argmin of Rn hat of H, right? That's what we did. However, looking at this expression that we are having here, okay, we should not be doing just this, because if you do this, we are only minimizing one of the terms of your upper bound. In fact, a better solution is we should do Hn hat star should be argmin over H belonging to H, Rn hat of H, and then there must be some complexity term that we should put together. Okay, and then we should try to do minimization, and this is what is called as the idea of regularization. Okay, so we will do it even more in detail when we see bias variance trade-off. But through this boxed thing here, we can see directly that you should not directly try to minimize. See, whenever I'm telling you that there is an upper bound of A plus B applying, if you only minimize over A, that may not be good. I should minimize over A as well as minimize over B. Okay. So if I, for example, right, if I choose, let's say a very good model, let's say I choose the late state of the art, some neural network model, I may be able to get very good control here, but this may be very high. Okay. Whereas if I use just simple linear regression, I may not get very good here, but this may be very low. So you have to minimize the sum total of both the things, not just one of the things. And when you try to do that, that is very similar to the idea of regularization. Okay. So we will look at the regularization aspect in more detail when we look at bias variance trade-off. But here at this point, I just wanted to show you a consequence of the VC discussion, right? The consequence is the true risk is upper bounded by the data error plus a term which is a function of VC of H by N. If a model is more complicated, this VC of H will be high, whereas a simple model will have a low VC of H. So that way we can understand that model choice, the hypothesis choice is an important thing, because this is how it can actually impact, because there are two terms that is actually being bounding your true risk, right? There are two terms that have an impact, and one of the terms is completely due to the choice of the hypothesis. Okay, so that's one consequence. Yeah.
Sir, I didn't understand how you got that bound in the first place.
Which bound? This bound?
Yes, sir. The boxed bound.
Okay, so let's go over it once again a little slowly. So basically, one thing. Let me just. Who was it that asked me?
Sir, me.
Okay, Siddharth. So now, see, one thing that we have to do is that delta is something that is given to us from a like exogenously. Okay, this phrase. Okay. So what that means is that is typically decided by the literature, the scientific community. So delta is a choice that you need to make. That is not really important here. Okay, so suppose that delta is a significance levels that you have chosen. So for instance, people typically use 5% significance or 0.05 p-value. That's one thing that they typically use. So suppose there is a delta, which is like, this delta is your acceptable delta. Okay, suppose somebody gives you delta. If you look at this expression, Siddharth, can we ensure that this expression is less than delta?
Yes, sir.
Right, because this is an e power minus n is there, and then you can make it large enough so that this entire term starts going smaller and smaller. The overall thing becomes smaller and smaller. Is that okay?
Yes, sir, that's fine.
That's fine, right? So now what I'm doing is, given that this is equal to delta, I will set it equal to delta and I will solve for epsilon. That is what I did here. This epsilon is just a series of algebraic steps that gave us this. Is that okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So this epsilon is telling that given that I have this particular n number of samples, this is an epsilon that depends on n, right? So this is what is given. Now, what I said is, if you look at the VC inequality that we get, right? So we are saying that the worst in our bag is crossing epsilon with this probability, right?
Yes, sir.
So that means every fellow, if at all, if this is less than delta, so delta is a significance level. So if this is chosen small enough, I can assume without, with some acceptable risk, I will assume that this is happening. Okay, this is equal to 0. I can assume, right? So delta is your choice. I will assume that this is never going to happen. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Because delta is chosen by you and you have ensured that this number is less than delta, that is an acceptable risk. So with that understanding, I will say that no hypothesis in my bag is crossing epsilon. Okay. Right?
Okay, sir.
So then this is an absolute value. So I can now open the absolute values to get this result. I can push the RNH onto the other side, right? So this is same as, if you wish, we can write this as RH minus RNH. That doesn't change the absolute value business, right? So this is less than epsilon. So if I accept that, H belonging to H, right? Siddharth, can I assume that this is always true?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is fine.
This is true because, of course, there is a delta tolerance, but I'm assuming that is small enough. Okay. And when that is if it is true for everything in my bag, in particular for all H, it will be the case that Rn minus Rh is less than epsilon. So I can do this. I push that Rn hat outside.
Sir, but there was a mod there, right? So
yes,
that mod could have opened with both the signs.
Yeah,
positive and negative.
Yeah, no matter how you choose, that is still okay, right? See, RH is that is still okay. I mean, so if I take like A minus B is less than C, I get two consequences out of this, okay? I get B minus A is less than C and I get A minus B less than C. Both are true. Correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So,
okay,
sir,
both are
just
both
one
are true. I just took one which is convenient for me and I pushed the B on the other side.
Okay, sir.
So the one that I took was Rn minus RH minus Rn hat of H is less than epsilon. So that one I took and then I push the Rn on the other side. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, and now it's clear.
Now it's clear, right? So did you understand the consequence of this this kind of a study? Because now we are saying that if you just use the empirical risk directly and directly minimize that may not be the best strategy. Okay, you may want to also tag along the complexity of your model as a term, and together you should try to minimize. That is the best way to choose your hypothesis bag. This is a choice about a hypothesis bag. Okay, Siddharth, is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Okay, so that is what is the consequence of this study. Okay, so this is an important thing, and we will see that a very similar term even comes when we do bias variance trade-off, which will start probably on this Saturday, or maybe what I will do this Saturday, since it's an extra class, I will continue with examples of computing VC dimensions for various H's, and tomorrow I will start bias variance trade-off. I think that is a better strategy. Okay. So anyway, so we will have a look at various examples where we compute the VC dimensions of various classes. But any case, I think so. One example we will quickly finish. So trying to compute VC dimension of a hypothesis. Okay, so let us choose an H. Okay, which is a function from R2 to this one, right? R2 to 0, 1. So this is your half spaces. So this is your half spaces, okay, or perceptron. Okay, so now our idea is we want to compute the VC dimension of this particular example, right? This half space perceptron type of example. So one thing that we saw in the last class, so what is it that we would like to do? Let us try to remind ourselves the expected value of, this is what we started off with, right? So H S2N 2N, right? This we started and we said we'll upper bound this by what is this? Max over S2N, right? M of H S2N 2N, right? This is what we said. So now, what is the VC dimension? What is the VC dimension? What is the VC theorem saying? VC theorem says that the growth function GH of M has two regions. In one region, you have M ln2. In the other region, what you have is that other thing, whatever that is, I will have to see. Yeah, this thing. Okay, so let me just refer. I don't remember the exact term, but yeah. So dVC of H, right? So ln M by dVC of H plus 1. So this is for all M less than or equal to dVC of H. Okay, and this is M greater than dVC of H. Now, in the last class, we saw that for the perceptron case, we could, for perceptron, okay, we saw that if we have points like this, so in R2, if you have given points like this, points in configuration below could be shattered, right? You remember this example, right, from the last class. So we could shatter this with a perceptron, right? We could shatter it in all possible 8 ways. So what can you say? So now I am asking, there is some dVC of H, okay, and I said that there were 3 ways in which I could shatter. So what should go here? So there are the choices are: 1, equality, okay, second is greater than or equal to, which is 3 is greater than or equal to dVC. Third one is less than or equal to. Okay, so there are 3 choices here for this problem. So I would like to know from all of you which one of the 3 is correct, 1, 2, or 3. Okay, so that's let's do a quick quiz. So which of the 3 is correct? So I'm not saying, okay, Ankit, I'm not saying, I'm saying that we could only shatter 3. I don't know whether we can shatter for 4. Okay, Ankit. So I'm just saying we could shatter for 3. I don't know whether we can shatter for 4. But given that we can only shatter for 3, at least we have seen that we can shatter for 3. I have still no idea that we can shatter for 4. What can you say? That's my question. I want everybody to answer. If you don't know, put a question mark so that at least I know where you stand. Okay, so yes, so if you come back to the VC inequality, what we are saying, this is in this world, when the growth function is here in this world, right? This is the case where you are shattering, you have shattered all the points. This is the shattered world. Okay, whenever you have shattered, that means that particular number should be less than or equal to dVC. Okay, so 3 is the correct answer. Bhavna and Rohit, do I answer your doubt? Is it clear now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So now we will add the 4th case. The 4th case was, if you remember, when I take 4 points, there are 2 ways in which those 4 points can come. One world is where the 3 points are collinear, right? So there are 3 points which are collinear. And there were 4 points which are like this, which forms a quadrilateral. Not necessarily this quadrilateral, but a quadrilateral, right? So when you have this kind of a world, if you color these vertices opposite way, there is no linear classifier that can shatter this. Okay. Similarly, if you have colors like this, there is no way you can shatter just these 3 points. Forget about 4 points. Okay, even the 3 points we couldn't shatter. So what we have shown, m equal to 4 is in the non-shattered world, not shattered. That means any configuration you take, you cannot shatter it. So I hope the difference is clear. See, when you are in this world, we are saying that there exists a configuration, this configuration, for example, which you could shatter. Okay, in the 3 world itself, if the 3 points were lying in a line, we couldn't shatter it. Okay, so this we couldn't shatter, but that doesn't matter. In the shattered world, I am just looking for one particular configuration which I can shatter, right? Because I'm doing the worst case. Remember, I'm taking worst case over all possible configurations I'm trying to shatter. So as long as you are able to find one configuration which you can shatter, you are in the shattered world. Okay, but as soon as you go to 4 points, there is no configuration you can shatter. Okay, so the way we saw that is, when you have 4 points, either 3 of them are collinear or no 3 are collinear. If the 3 are collinear, you cannot shatter anyway. If 4 of them are collinear, not collinear, 3 of them are not collinear, then they form a quadrilateral. And what you can do is opposite sides of the quadrilateral, you can color as one. There is no way a linear perceptron can separate it. Okay, so now with this additional information, what can you say? Yes, what is the conclusion now? Can someone tell? Yeah, so we are in answer is it, yeah, now finally we are saying the VC dimension of this perceptron is 3. Okay, the VC dimension of the perceptron is 3, and the way we understood is, if you look at that W transpose X, right? W transpose X plus W naught. W here has 2 terms, W1 and W2. So essentially there are 3 terms that are defining a perceptron. Okay, and the VC dimension is also equal to 3. So this kind of a similarity, like if the number of parameters you are learning, many a times that will correlate with the VC dimension of your class. Okay, so given that you are trying to learn a perceptron in 2 dimension, how much data do you need? Yes? Using the thumb rule?
VC dimension is 2.
VC dimension is 3, right? Because I showed here. So given that the VC dimension is 3, there are 3 parameters I'm learning. How many samples do I need to have using the thumb rule idea? 30.
30.
Yeah, okay, at least 30. So this is a thumb rule. Don't always trust it, but it's a good way to at least get some kind of idea, right? Whether you have enough parameters or not. When you are learning, you cannot find the VC dimension always, but you can always count how many parameters you are learning. As long as you have 10 times the number of data, at least there is a chance that you will be able to learn. All right, so that's about it. So tomorrow, I think we will start bias variance trade-off. On Saturday, the special class, I will look at some examples of how to compute VC dimensions for various things. Okay, so that's about it. Let me stop here. I will hang back for questions. All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.